Whenever I'm reading a book, or I'm watching a show, or I'm playing a game, or whatever fictional thing, if I stumble across a character that reminds me of another character from an entirely different fictional thing, I can't help but wonder how those two characters would interact. Would they hate each other? Would they become boys? What could they accomplish if they teamed up? Stuff like that. I do it quite a lot, actually, now that I think about it, and if you're thinking, well, Isaiah, that just sounds like writing fan fiction with less steps, please don't say that. Anyway, I recently finished watching this show called Ozark, which is pretty damn good. It gets compared to Breaking Bad quite a bit, since they're both about boring, straighty 180 fellas who decide to start using their skills in a certain field to commit crime and provide for their families. The elevator pitch is basically the same, except the crime is different. As you probably already know, Walter White is in the meth business, or the empire business, talk about a fucking ego, and Marty Byrde is in the money laundering business. Walt is a massively overqualified chemistry teacher who is an actual genius chemist, and Marty is a massively overqualified financial advisor who understands the numbers like nobody else. Walt, of course, uses his knowledge and expertise to begin manufacturing the good stuff, and Marty decides to launder money for a Mexican good stuff cartel. You get the idea, they're very alike. Well, at least on a surface level. Their beliefs and attitudes and goals do differ quite a bit, which I think makes a hypothetical interaction between them even more interesting. Do they get along? Do they combine their criminal genius and become effectively unstoppable? Or do they become sworn enemies? Or even competitors? These universes are quite different tonally, but they're similar enough that I could see either character existing in either universe without it seeming super out of place. With that being said, when I imagine these two interacting, it's always in Walt's world. Always. I've got this image in my mind that I cannot escape from, and it's ridiculous, but you know that part of Breaking Bad when Saul is sort of introducing Walt to the wonders of money laundering? Well, I imagine this is where Marty Byrde gets dropped into the picture, okay? This is where he joins the match officially. I imagine Marty Byrde as one of Saul's guys.
Let's just say I know a guy who knows a guy who knows another guy.
Just for the sake of this scenario, which is not to be confused with any form of fan fiction, because that would just be weird and definitely not something that I would ever engage in, this is how Marty gets factored in. After Walt and Skylar agree to buy the car wash and to launder money through it, Saul suggests they hand the financials over to his guy instead of Skylar. Which, I mean, look, that's not a fucking bad deal. I'm sorry, Skylar White, yo, but Marty Byrde, yo, is an accounting genius. Simply put, nobody does the numbers like this dude does. It's not my fault you're expecting to get a job out of this just because you're Heisenberg's wife, alright? Just because he supports dissolving people in barrels does not mean he'd stoop as low as nepotism, okay? For simplicity's sake, I'm happy to just sort of pause around here in the Breaking Bad continuity to consider how these two might interact. It's just that both of these characters change considerably throughout their shows, so using this general area of the Breaking Bad timeline and, say, the middle of Ozark is how I'll be gauging their personalities. Alright, so the stage is set. These boys have officially entered into a professional relationship. So how does it go? Well, it seems obvious enough to me that these two would just not get along.
I'm dying. My cancer is back. You're not hurting anyone.
I'm not sure what I'm supposed to say to that.
Like, sure, there are similarities, and there are a few key traits that could help balance out their extremes. For example, Walt is frustratingly stubborn, while Marty is a great mediator. Walt is willing to do whatever it takes to make progress in his goals, whereas Marty is a little bit of a half-measures guy sometimes and often needs a little push. Walt's kind of prone to losing it a bit when everything falls to pieces, but Marty is so attached to the idea that any problem can be rationally solved that you rarely see him bat an eye at, well, anything. I know most people watching this will know Walter White more than they know Marty Byrde, but I swear, dude, the cartel could point a rocket launcher at Marty and his entire family and he'd still be all like,
we're just gonna prioritize and we're gonna compartmentalize and there's gonna be a little bit of time management, okay?
Of course, if you take their traits that complement each other, lay them out on the table without context, and try to make them fit, then yeah, sure. We've got the two biggest dads in the drug business working together. An unstoppable force of not being mad, just a little disappointed that the DEA is trying to shut them down. But the thing is, we're dealing with a relatively stable Mardo and a very unstable Walder. The differences between them will be painfully apparent, but the similarities are also bound to clash. They're both complete control freaks who always believe that their way is the only way. They're both constantly under pressure as they try to navigate the volatile business they're in while attempting to keep their family life intact. They also both like to be the smartest guy in the room, which, yeah, they're both incredibly intelligent, obviously, but it's one of many clashes that would probably get in the way of them truly being boys, you know? Like, if you've seen Breaking Bad, you've seen how Walt gets when there's other smart guys around. Anyone who dares to challenge his worth as the brain usually gets a hole in theirs eventually, so I'm not sure how this would really work out on that front. But here's the thing. These two have totally different criminal ambitions. Marty actually isn't obsessed with status, and he isn't interested in making legacy plays like Walt is. Believe it or not, the dude actually wants to play in the background of a larger operation while the real criminals do the dirty stuff. So if he has a secure spot in the background to do his thing, he wouldn't be interested in challenging anybody. He's pretty much as white collar as it gets, and the reason he even decides to take his skills with accounting into this field in the first place is because he does it under the impression that he's going to be completely out of the spotlight. He thinks he's going to move numbers around on his computer as normal, just for different people and for way more money. Obviously, it doesn't actually turn out like that for him, but that's what the goal was. The main problem for Marty in Ozark is that the cartel is quite possibly the most unreasonable boss of all fucking time. They're always saying something like, Marty, if you don't launder $30 billion of our drug money through your local EB games within the next 17 hours without internet access and while juggling 3 oranges, I will shoot you, your wife, your son, and your daughter in the head. And believe me when I tell you, you will not be going first in the actual event. It's ridiculous. It's totally insane. Marty would be the most efficient business partner of all time if he didn't have to deal with totally unreasonable orders at the threat of extinction every 5 minutes. If he really was just, I don't know, chilling and laundering money through Walter White's car wash for the big bucks, I reckon he'd be in his dream position, honestly. Don't get me wrong, Walt is unreasonable a lot of the time, and he can be a total maniac when somebody challenges him or even inconveniences him, but Marty never really loses his mild-mannered, I'm just here to do my work and get my paycheck attitude. So maybe this would be okay as a workplace friendship, you know? Marty isn't gonna try and grab the steering wheel of the entire operation, as I said, so at the very least, there shouldn't be any tension when it comes to competition. Walt could probably be the okayest boss Marty ever had, at least while things are running smoothly. Which is kinda sad, honestly, but I just don't see it going beyond that between these two. When I first started thinking about how these two might interact, I had it in my mind that they'd be this unstoppable pair of criminal geniuses since they're both so clever in two different integral parts of the drug business. But I think their philosophy and end goals are just too incompatible. Cause like they're on the same block, right? Criminality corner. But they're walking along two totally different paths. You see, Marty doesn't want his whole life to be crime. He wants crime to supplement an ordinary life. He legitimately believes it possible to live the American dream while operating within a business like this. Whereas Walt, even though it takes him a very fucking long time to come out and say it, just wants to be at the top. He wants everything he can possibly squeeze out of this business, and he won't stop until he gets it. It's a risky 9 to 5 for Marty, and a life-defining thrill ride for Walter. It just doesn't match. And it's weird, because at first glance, they're a match made in heaven, because they're just fellas, right? They're both the plainest pair of fellas you could possibly find around with their button-up shirts and their fatherly duties and their marital problems.
I thought Ted.
But upon closer inspection, you just can't ignore the fact that one's a batshit narcissist with a bruise on his ego that hasn't cleared up for like 30 years, and the other is a naive mathematician who thinks having drug kingpins as bosses could ever result in a healthy workplace relationship. So, I think we can cut friendship, bromance, boy status out of the equation, right? But I also think we can cut sworn enemies out as well. As I said, Marty isn't gunning for the top. It's really not that deep for him. The goal is to go to work and come home at the end of the day with a hefty paycheck. He's not going to be Walt's competitor, he's going to be Walt's employee. But if we're going to hinge this co-workership on how they work together, I think we've got to stop for a second to consider how Walt treats those he already works with. He's demanding.
Get off the toilet!
He's impatient.
Get off the toilet!
He's a bit of an asshole. In fact, I'd say one of Walt's biggest downfalls is his inability to truly work with people. Yes, he does technically collaborate with others, but he doesn't really work with them a lot of the time, especially not towards the end. I wanted to say that Marty could counterbalance this because he relies so heavily on collaboration, but then I think, well, Walt worked with a lot of reasonable and intelligent people, and he is usually the problem regardless. I had to remind myself that Walt stepped into an already existing underworld that had been thriving for decades, and it was ultimately him that tore a lot of it down. And that's because Walt doesn't have true friendships or partnerships. The way he sees it, if you're above him, you're an enemy, and if you're below him, you're an instrument. Marty would simply be another high-value tool for Walt to use on his erratic climb to the top. There's not a lot of desire for him to get chummy there. And when shit does well and truly hit the fan during that climb to the top, Big Man Martin is not sticking around anyway. Like, this isn't some sort of one-sided friendship where Marty would want to be friends with Walter desperately or anything. Like, Marty catches a single whiff of said shit-on fan, he will pack his bags, gather his family, and head on out. In Ozark, he doesn't really have a choice but to do everything the cartel says, for a lot of reasons that I won't get into, so he can't really get out when things get especially sketchy. But when it comes to a terminally ill 50-year-old who is barely holding it all together and who doesn't really have the reach of an entire cartel that's been established for decades, I reckon Marty would just pack up and piss off eventually, eh? Like, he'd just be gonskis. He's not sitting around contemplating their friendship anyway. And Walt's not gonna fucking chase him. Walt's busy. Smoking weed. On a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being I hate your guts, and 10 being you're the kind of homie I kiss goodnight, I'm feeling like a 4 here in the end. 4 being you're one of the only people at work I don't completely despise, I guess. These two, with their differences in ambition in the business, as well as Walt's massive ego and general unstableness, just make for a rocky employee and employer relationship that just wouldn't stand the test of time given Walt's current trajectory. They'd never be close enough to enter that unbreakable ride or die partnership, and while it makes me sad that the two dads of ill-gotten gains couldn't get along, I just think it wasn't meant to be. Now, if we're talking less fictional friendships and more fictional wife swap, then these two are basically made for each other. I think they'd single-handedly get the planet nuked somehow or something, but anyway, that's a whole other thing that I was thinking about in my spare time. Thanks for listening to what I was thinking about, by the way. I really do appreciate it. Lastly, let's just remember that this is in no way, shape, or form a fan fiction, okay? Because, it's not, okay? So let's just stay on the same page about that, and I will see you in whatever comes out next.